Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. This happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still getting a kick out of how it all played out. I live at the end of what looks like a regular suburban cul-de-sac, but my situation is a bit different than my neighbors. My house sits on what's called a flag lot, basically a long, narrow driveway that opens up to where my actual house sits, kind of hidden behind the other houses on the street. The thing is, my house has been here for almost 40 years. It was originally a small farmhouse that my grandfather built back in the late 1970s, long before this whole neighborhood existed. When the developers came in about 20 years ago to build what they call the upscale community around us, they had to work around our property since we refused to sell. The result is this weird setup where my driveway connects to their street, but my house and most of my land sits separate from their subdivision. I inherited the place from my grandfather about 5 years ago, and until recently I never had any issues with the homeowners association that runs the neighborhood. They do their thing with their fancy landscaping and their community events, and I do mine. My wife and I keep our property neat and tidy, we don't cause any trouble, and we generally get along fine with our neighbors who actually live in the subdivision. That all changed when this new HOA president took over earlier this year. I'll call her the president since I don't want to use names, but let's just say she's the type of person who thinks being in charge of a neighborhood association makes her some kind of local government official. She's been living in the neighborhood for about 10 years and has very strong opinions about what she calls maintaining property values and community standards. The trouble started when I got home from work one Tuesday evening and found this official-looking notice stuck under my windshield wiper. It was printed on fancy letterhead with the HOA logo and had "Notice of Violation" stamped across the top in red letters. According to this notice, I was in violation of something called the Uniform Paving and Landscaping Initiative that the HOA had apparently passed at their last meeting. The notice claimed that my driveway needed to be resurfaced with a specific type of stamped concrete that matched the rest of the neighborhood, and that my 1995 pickup truck was considered an unsightly vehicle that could not be parked where it was visible from the street. The truck isn't some beat-up junker either. It's a classic that I've been restoring for years, and it's in better condition than most of the cars in the neighborhood. But apparently it didn't meet their standards for what should be parked in driveways. The real kicker was at the bottom of the notice. It said I had 72 hours to come into compliance or I would be subject to daily fines of $500 until the violations were corrected. $500 a day for parking my own truck in my own driveway and having a perfectly functional asphalt surface instead of their fancy stamped concrete. I showed the notice to my wife when she got home, and she was just as confused as I was. We'd never signed any HOA agreements, never paid any HOA fees, never attended any of their meetings. As far as we knew, we weren't part of their association at all. But there was this official notice treating us like we were just another house in their subdivision. The next morning, I decided to call the number on the notice and try to clear up what I figured had to be some kind of mistake. The phone rang a few times before the HOA president answered with this very professional-sounding greeting about how she was there to help maintain their beautiful community. I introduced myself and explained that I'd received their notice, but I was pretty sure there had been some kind of error since I wasn't actually part of their HOA. I told her about how my house predated their subdivision and how I'd never signed any agreements with them. Her response was not what I was expecting. Instead of apologizing for the mistake or saying she'd look into it, she got this condescending tone and started lecturing me about community responsibility. She said that being part of a community meant following the rules, even the ones you don't like, and that my clunker was lowering property values for everyone in the neighborhood. When I tried to explain again that I wasn't actually part of their community, she cut me off and said that their map clearly showed my property at the end of their street, so I was obviously in what she called their jurisdiction. She refused to even look at my deed or any of the property documents I offered to show her. Then she really doubled down on the whole thing. She told me that if I wanted to keep living in their neighborhood, I needed to start acting like a responsible neighbor. She gave me until the end of the week to sign something she called a maintenance agreement that would bring me into compliance with all their rules, or they would place a lien on my house for the unpaid fines. I have to admit I was pretty shocked by her attitude. I'd been polite and reasonable, trying to work out what I thought was a simple misunderstanding, and she was treating me like some kind of deadbeat who was trying to get out of paying his dues. The call ended with her telling me that she'd been living in the neighborhood for 10 years and knew the rules better than I did. After I hung up, I spent some time going through the paperwork I had from when I inherited the house. My grandfather had been pretty meticulous about keeping records, and I had copies of the original deed, the survey from when the house was built, and all the correspondence with the developers when they were building around our property. Everything I found confirmed what I already knew. Our property had never been part of the subdivision. We had our own separate legal description, our own tax parcel number, and our driveway was actually classified as a private access easement that we owned outright. The developers had negotiated with my grandfather to allow them to connect their street to our access point, but we had never given up ownership or control of our property. I figured this would be easy enough to resolve once I showed them the documentation. Boy, was I wrong about that. The next day, I was at work when my wife called me in a panic. She said there was a paving crew at our house with trucks and equipment, and they were spray painting orange marks all over our driveway. When she went out to ask them what they were doing, they told her they'd been hired by the HOA to prepare our driveway for demolition and replacement. I told her to take pictures of everything and not to let them start any actual work. Then I jumped in my car and drove home as fast as I could. When I got there, I found these guys measuring our driveway and marking it up like they owned the place. Their crew chief showed me a work order that had been signed by the HOA president authorizing them to bring the property into compliance with community standards. I had to explain to these guys that nobody had authorized this work, that I wasn't part of the HOA, and that they needed to leave my property immediately. The crew chief was actually pretty reasonable about it. He said they'd been hired to do a job, but if there was a dispute about authorization, they'd pack up and let the people who hired them sort it out. But before they left, the crew chief mentioned something that really caught my attention. He said the HOA had also hired them to do some work around their community sign, which apparently needed to be relocated because of some kind of property line issue. That got me thinking about exactly where that sign was located. After the paving crew left, I walked down to look at the community sign more carefully. It was this big, fancy stone monument with the neighborhood name and some landscaping around it. I'd seen it every day for years, but I'd never really paid attention to exactly where it was positioned. Now that I was looking more closely, it seemed like it might actually be sitting on my side of where I thought the property line was. That evening, I called a surveyor that a friend had recommended and scheduled them to come out and mark the exact boundaries of my property. I figured if the HOA wanted to play games with property lines and community standards, I should probably know exactly where my property ended and theirs began. The surveyor came out the following Monday morning. He spent about 3 hours taking measurements and checking his equipment against the original survey markers that had been placed when my grandfather's house was built. What he found was pretty interesting. Not only was my house definitely not part of the HOA subdivision, but their fancy community sign and about 10 feet of their landscaping was actually sitting on my property. According to the surveyor, this had probably been the case since they first installed the sign about 15 years ago. Nobody had ever bothered to check the exact property lines when they put it in. The surveyor marked my property boundaries with bright pink stakes and gave me a detailed report showing exactly where my land ended and the subdivision began. He also provided me with copies of all the original survey documents and legal descriptions that proved my ownership of the land where their sign was sitting. Armed with this information, I decided it was time to have another conversation with the HOA president. But first, I wanted to do a little more research into exactly what rights I had and what options were available to me. I spent that evening going through all the documents more carefully and doing some research online about property rights and HOA authority. What I found was pretty enlightening. Not only did the HOA have no authority over my property, but they had been technically trespassing on my land for over a decade with their sign and landscaping. I also discovered that since my driveway was classified as a private access easement, I had the right to control access to it. The fact that the HOA street connected to my driveway didn't give them any ownership or control over my property. In fact, looking at the original plat maps, it appeared that their street actually terminated just before it reached my driveway, which meant I was allowing them to use part of my property as their turnaround area. The more I researched, the more I realized that the HOA president had picked a fight with the wrong person. She seemed to think that just because my house was at the end of their street, she could treat me like any other homeowner in her subdivision. But legally speaking, I was more like a neighboring property owner who happened to share an access point with their development. By Wednesday of that week, I still hadn't heard back from the HOA about the paving crew incident. I was starting to think that maybe they'd realized their mistake and were going to quietly drop the whole thing. But then, I got home from work to find another notice. This one, even more official looking than the first. This new notice was titled, Notice of Intent to Foreclose, and claimed that I owed the HOA $4,500 in unpaid daily fines for my continued violations of their community standards. It said that if I didn't pay the full amount within 10 days, they would place a lien on my property and begin foreclosure proceedings. I have to admit, seeing that word foreclosure in writing was pretty jarring, even though I knew they had no legal authority to actually follow through on it. But it made me realize that the HOA president wasn't going to back down just because I'd tried to reason with her. She was apparently planning to escalate this thing until one of us gave up. That's when I decided to stop playing defense and start playing offense. If she wanted to treat this like a legal battle, then I was going to give her one. But I was going to do it on my terms, with my facts, and with the full weight of property law on my side. The first thing I did was contact a real estate attorney who specialized in property disputes. I brought him all my documentation, including the surveyor's report and the original deeds, and explained the whole situation. He looked everything over and confirmed what I already suspected. The HOA had absolutely no authority over my property, and their threats of liens and foreclosure were completely baseless. But more importantly, he pointed out that the HOA had been committing what's called adverse possession by placing their sign and landscaping on my property without permission. In our state, this could actually be a pretty serious legal issue for them, especially since they'd been doing it for so many years. The attorney suggested that instead of just defending myself against their baseless claims, I should go on the offensive and demand that they remove their encroachments from my property. He also suggested that I could potentially charge them for the use of my land over all these years, kind of like retroactive rent for the space their sign had been occupying. That gave me an idea for how to handle this whole situation. Instead of just sending them a letter explaining why they were wrong, I was going to set a trap that would expose exactly how little they actually knew about property law and community authority. I had the surveyor come back out and install permanent markers showing my exact property boundaries. These weren't just little stakes that could be moved or overlooked. These were bright orange posts with reflective tape and no trespassing private property signs attached to them. I made sure they were positioned so that it was absolutely clear that the HOA sign and landscaping were sitting on my land. Then I did something that I thought was particularly clever. I researched the exact procedure for calling an emergency HOA board meeting and formally requested one using the language from their own bylaws. In my request, I said I needed to address an urgent property matter that affected the entire community. The HOA president probably thought I was going to show up to beg for mercy or try to negotiate some kind of payment plan for the fines they thought I owed. She had no idea what was actually coming. While I was waiting for them to schedule the meeting, I had my attorney prepare a formal cease and desist letter demanding that the HOA remove all their property from my land within 30 days. But I didn't send it yet. I wanted to save that for the right moment. I also had him prepare an invoice for what he called land lease fees, covering the 20 years that their sign had been sitting on my property. Using comparable commercial land rental rates in our area, we calculated that they owed me about $15,000 in retroactive fees, plus interest. The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening in the community center. I spent the week before the meeting preparing my presentation and gathering every piece of documentation I could find that supported my position. I wanted to make sure that when I dropped this bomb on them, they would have no doubt about the facts. My wife asked me if I was maybe going a little overboard with all this preparation. After all, we're talking about a neighborhood HOA, not some major corporation. But I explained to her that the HOA president had made this personal when she refused to listen to reason and started threatening our house. If she wanted to play hardball, I was going to show her what hardball actually looked like. The night of the meeting, I showed up with a folder full of documents, copies of all my research, and a printout of the surveyor's report with detailed photos of their sign sitting on my property. The community center meeting room was set up with a long table for the board members and rows of chairs for residents. There were maybe 15 or 20 people there, mostly board members and a few curious neighbors who'd heard about the dispute. The HOA president started the meeting by explaining that they'd called this emergency session to address a serious compliance issue with a property owner who was refusing to follow community standards. She went through a whole presentation about the importance of maintaining property values and how exceptions to their rules would set a dangerous precedent. She talked about how my old truck was an eyesore that was affecting everyone's home values and how my refusal to upgrade my driveway was showing disrespect for the community that surrounded my property. She made it sound like I was some kind of deadbeat neighbor who was dragging down the whole neighborhood. Then she opened the floor for me to respond. She probably expected me to apologize and offer to work out some kind of compromise. Instead, I stood up and thanked the board for giving me the opportunity to address what I called some serious misunderstandings about property ownership and legal authority. I started by laying out the basic facts about my property. I explained how my house predated their subdivision, how I'd never signed any HOA agreements, and how my property had its own separate legal description that was completely independent of their development. Then I brought out the surveyor's report and started walking them through the exact boundaries of my property. I could see the HOA president starting to look uncomfortable as I explained how the survey had been conducted and what it had revealed about the actual property lines, but the real bombshell came when I got to the part about their community sign. I pulled out the photos showing their fancy stone monuments sitting clearly on my side of the property line, and I explained how this had been the case for the entire 15 years since they'd installed it. The room got very quiet as I walked them through the legal implications of what they'd been doing. I explained that by placing permanent structures on my property without permission, they had been committing what's legally called trespassing and conversion of property. Then I pulled out the cease and desist letter and read it aloud to the entire room. It formally demanded that they remove all their structures from my property within 30 days, or face potential legal action for the unauthorized use of my land. But I wasn't done yet. I also presented them with the invoice for retroactive land lease fees, explaining how I'd calculated the fair market value for the use of my property over the past 20 years. The total amount, with interest, came to just over $15,000. The HOA president's face had gone completely white by this point. She started sputtering about how they'd been maintaining that sign for the good of the community, and how I was being unreasonable by demanding payment for something that benefited everyone. That's when I played my final card. I explained that according to the original plat maps, their street actually terminated before it reached my driveway, which meant they'd also been using part of my property as their emergency vehicle turnaround area. I mentioned that as the property owner, I had the legal right to restrict access to my land, including the installation of gates or barriers. I let that sink in for a moment before explaining what this meant in practical terms. If I decided to exercise my property rights and block their access to the turnaround area, their fire department would lose its ability to service the houses at the end of the cul-de-sac. Their own community standards probably required maintaining emergency vehicle access, which meant they needed my cooperation to stay in compliance with county regulations. The room erupted into concerned chatter as the board members started to realize the full scope of what I was telling them. They weren't just dealing with a neighbor who was refusing to follow their rules. They were dealing with someone who actually owned land that was essential to their community's basic infrastructure. One of the other board members, an older gentleman who'd been quietly listening to everything, asked to see my documentation. I handed him copies of the surveyor's report, the original deed, and the plat maps showing the relationship between my property and their subdivision. He studied the papers for several minutes while the room waited in silence. Finally, he looked up and said that based on what he was seeing, it appeared that I was correct about not being part of their HOA, and that they had indeed been using my property without authorization. The HOA president tried to argue that there had to be some kind of agreement or understanding from when the subdivision was built, but I was ready for that too. I pulled out copies of all the correspondence between my grandfather and the original developers, showing exactly what had been agreed to and what hadn't. The developers had been allowed to connect their street to my grandfather's existing driveway access point, but ownership and control of the property had never changed hands. My grandfather had specifically insisted on maintaining his independence from any future homeowners association, and that was clearly documented in the original agreements. By this point, several of the board members were looking pretty nervous. One of them asked what I was looking for in terms of resolving the situation. I could tell they were hoping I'd be willing to just forget about the whole thing if they dropped their fines and left me alone, but I explained that this had gone beyond just dropping their baseless claims against my property. They had spent weeks threatening me with liens and foreclosure over violations that didn't actually apply to my property. They had sent contractors to my house without permission to begin demolition work on my driveway. And they had been illegally occupying my land for over a decade without ever asking for permission or offering compensation. I told them I was willing to be reasonable about resolving the situation, but that would require them to acknowledge what had actually happened and make it right. That meant formally withdrawing all their claims against my property, removing their structures from my land, and compensating me for the unauthorized use of my property over the years. The older board member who'd been reviewing my documents asked if there might be some way to work out an agreement that would allow their sign to stay where it was. He suggested that maybe we could negotiate some kind of easement or lease arrangement that would be fair to everyone. I said I was open to discussing that kind of solution, but it would need to be a proper legal agreement that recognized my ownership of the property and provided fair compensation for its use, and it would definitely need to include a written acknowledgement that my house was not part of their HOA and was not subject to their authority. The HOA president was clearly not happy with the direction this was going. She started talking about how I was being vindictive and unreasonable, and how this whole situation was just a misunderstanding that had gotten blown out of proportion. But the other board members were starting to see the bigger picture. If they tried to fight me on this, they'd be looking at potentially expensive legal battles that they were almost certainly going to lose. And even if they won somehow, they'd still need to find a solution for the access and turnaround issues that would probably cost them far more than just negotiating with me. The meeting ended with the board agreeing to suspend all enforcement actions against my property while they consulted with their own attorney about the situation. They also agreed to schedule a follow-up meeting within 2 weeks to discuss potential resolutions. As people were filing out of the meeting, several of my neighbors came up to talk to me. Most of them were pretty supportive, saying they had no idea about the property line issues and that they thought the HOA had been overreaching with their enforcement actions lately. One neighbor mentioned that the HOA president had been getting more and more aggressive about rule enforcement since she'd taken over, and that several people in the neighborhood were getting tired of her attitude. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd been having problems with her approach to community management. Over the next week, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that the HOA board was having some pretty heated discussions about how to handle the situation. Apparently, their attorney had confirmed everything I'd told them about property law and HOA authority, and had strongly advised them to settle the matter quickly before it escalated further. The follow-up meeting was scheduled for the next Thursday, but I got a call from the older board member on Tuesday asking if I'd be willing to meet with a smaller group to discuss potential solutions. He said they'd like to work something out without having to involve the full community in what he called the messy details. I agreed to meet with him and 2 other board members, not including the HOA president. We met at a local coffee shop, and they laid out what they were prepared to offer to resolve the situation. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This is my boyfriend's story, not mine, full disclosure, but he gave me permission to put it up. He's just too lazy too and doesn't have Reddit. He framed this story by proudly telling me his boss learned who not to be petty with today. While working in the back of the store, my partner was wearing his personal sweater. He was between a break room and a freezer and couldn't be seen by any customers. His manager, who'd just got there, immediately got on his case. He tried to explain reasonably. He'd have it on for maybe 15 minutes max and remove it before going back out onto the floor. The manager refused and begins pestering him and telling him he needs to remove it immediately, under the reasoning it wasn't corporate approved. Q** malicious compliance. The jackets they use for their coolers? Not corporate approved. The gloves they use in the same coolers? Not corporate approved. The communication system they use to talk amongst themselves in the store? Not corporate approved. An hour or so later, my partner is going about his janitorial and stocking duties, having to work in the cooler to restock. Every 5 to 10 minutes, he'd come out of the freezer, shivering and trying to warm up. After about 20 minutes of this, the same manager wandered over to them critically. "What are you doing?" "Stocking the freezer, but it's pretty cold in there." "Well, why don't you go grab a jacket and some gloves?" "Oh, because if you actually read our employee book surrounding our uniform, these technically aren't corporate approved either." The manager grumbled and wandered off, only coming to find him in another hour and a half. "I've been trying to reach you over the commutation system for the last 20 minutes. Why aren't you responding?" "Oh, that's because they're actually not corporate approved, unfortunately." "You're really going to be this petty? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just following corporate standards." It went like this for his entire 7-hour shift. At the end of his shift, the manager wandered up to him with an exasperated look. "I get it. Okay, I need to know how to pick my battles." "You absolutely do." If I didn't know him personally, I probably wouldn't have believed he actually said that to them, but he almost certainly does. He cares very little what anyone thinks. The next one is an entitled People Story. That title is what I heard when I answered a call from my younger brother. For quick context, my stepfather Jim had liver cancer. My mom needed diaphragm reconstruction. Forgive me if that's not the proper medical term. Was told she'd be laid up 4 and 6 weeks, but Jim wasn't in immediate danger of dying, so she should go ahead and do it. They were wrong. 2 days after she returned from hospital and could hardly move, Jim went into hospice and died that night. Mom was devastated, of course. She and Jim had a great marriage. Her first husband, my father, was abusive and cheated on her. The second was a severe alcoholic who, no lie, tried to murder her. Jim was a retired Marine Master Gunnery Sergeant who was as rough, tough, and gruff as any stereotype that title brings to mind. Mom was about as liberal as they come, while Jim was, well, the opposite of that. But they made it work, and each worshipped the ground the other walked on. She'd finally found a good one, and we all loved him. For context of what's to come, my mom was pretty well off, whereas Jim came into the marriage with basically nothing. A week after I posted Jim's obit, I got that frantic call from my younger brother who'd been taking good care of Mom. My brother was low to mid-functioning autistic, but he really stepped up to the plate when Mom needed him. I asked who is taking stuff out of Mom's house, but only got an incoherent, screaming reply, so I left work and headed over there. But first, I called my older brother. On the off chance there's going to be an altercation, I have to admit I'm pretty clean-cut and wouldn't intimidate anyone unless they mistook me for an IRS auditor. My older brother, however, rides a Harley, and you'd be hard-pressed to guess if he were a member of ZZ Top or the Hells Angels, or both. You wouldn't want to meet him in a dark alley. He's scary. At Mom's, I found Jim's adult son from a previous marriage, who none of us even knew existed, loading things into a flatbed trailer hitched to a big pickup truck with the help of his own son, about 12 years old. I demanded to know just WTF did they think they were doing when his big heifer wife came out of the house, hiked up her sweatpants, and heaved her way over to us. Long story short, too late, I know. They'd rented this trailer and driven all the way from Rochester, New York to Denver, Colorado, and by God, they were going to get what was rightfully theirs. Before I could get any further, both my brother and the police showed up. Good thing my brother didn't arrive before the cops because he looked ready to kill someone. Mom had sensibly called the police because she had no idea what was going on. Apparently my younger brother had let these folks in when they identified themselves. They said their condolences to Mom, and then heifer wife proceeded to point out things throughout the house that she wanted, and her husband started loading them up. She had this weird notion that everything in a marriage is split 50-50ths even after death, and they were just coming to take Jim's half. I'm not a lawyer, but I am pretty sure it doesn't work that way. I got most of that from their explanations to the police, who didn't stop me or my brother from taking everything back out of the trailer and truck bed. The officers forced politeness, but were obviously struggling not to roll their eyes and tell these people to get lost. "We'll be back," shouted heifer wife as they left empty-handed. Sure enough, they showed up the next day. Mom gave them my phone number, said I was handling everything and the cops were getting called if they tried to step one foot inside her home. Mom told me that Jim had a small rented storage space and they were welcome to take everything in it. So I gave them the address and met them there. Heifer wife was pretty pissed that there was nothing of value in this 5x5 rented closet. Sorting through Jim's stuff, she tossed his medals from Vietnam into the trash. Husband took some photo albums, not much else. While she's screaming what a waste of time this was, their 12-year-old son is outside looking very embarrassed. I spotted a very old Lionel train set in original box on a shelf, handed it to him and said, "I'm sure your grandfather would have wanted you to have this." It was probably the only thing of real value in there. They took off mostly empty-handed, shouting that I hadn't heard the last of this. I retrieved the military medals from the trash, Mom had them framed, and that was that. Or so I thought. A month later, Mom got some legal-ish document from a lawyer in Rochester demanding full disclosure of assets. I took it to a lawyer and he about fell out of his chair laughing. It wasn't even a court document, no lawsuit or anything, just an officious letter trying to scare Mom into some vague compliance. The lawyer advised not replying. Just ignore it. Which is exactly what we did. We never heard another peep from those idiots. But man, you gotta question how anyone can have such an inflated sense of entitlement that they think 50% of everything in their dead father's wife's house is rightfully theirs. Edit. I want to reply to everyone, but that feels like trying to inflate comments or something. I have to say, all your stories of going through similar incidences after losing a loved one are making me feel absolutely horrified. I know it happens, but it sounds like it's more common than I ever dreamed. We didn't even really lose anything, except sadly Jim, in the end, but most of you did. Very, very sickened to hear that. To clarify about none of us even knowing about the son, I should state that my brothers and I didn't know about him. My mother did, but she figured that was not her story to tell, so she never told us. Jim's son went full no contact years earlier and wouldn't even let Jim meet his grandson. I suspect that maybe Jim was Marine Sergeant Strict, and maybe that son didn't have the happiest childhood. That was not the Jim we knew, however. He was the last person you'd ever want to go NC with. Mom had the son's contact info and wrote to him when Jim was diagnosed with cancer, and his prognosis wasn't good. He never bothered to reply to her or get in touch with his father. She wrote to him again after Jim's death, which is how they knew to show up. Jim's only asset was an insurance policy, and the designated beneficiary was a trust for my older brother's young son and daughter. Even though Jim wasn't their biological grandfather, he was the only grandpa they ever knew. It's enough to help each with education or down payment on a home someday. They adored him, and my nephew dreams of joining the Marines one day to be just like Grandpa. The next one is an entitled People Story. My name is Tom, and I'm the young CEO and founder of a successful tech startup called Tech Trends. I started the company right out of college with a small investment from my parents. We've grown quickly over the past few years, and now have over 100 employees. Even though I'm the owner, I don't like to flaunt my position. I try to maintain a low profile and interact with employees at all levels. I want our culture to be humble and egalitarian. I think it promotes innovation and creativity when employees feel empowered and not micromanaged. Last week, I decided to spend a day shadowing one of our interns named Mark. Mark is a computer science major at a nearby university and was working part-time at Tech Trends as part of his senior year internship program. He had been with us for a few months and was eager to get some real-world experience before graduating. On the day I shadowed Mark, I dressed down in jeans, a hoodie, and baseball cap. I didn't want to attract attention or have people treat me differently because of my position. I packed a laptop bag and ventured out into the engineering department to find Mark's desk. Mark greeted me energetically, not realizing who I actually was. "Hey man, I'm Mark. You must be Tom from IT," he said. "That's right, I'm here to help you out with some troubleshooting today," I replied. Mark began explaining the new feature he was working on for our mobile app. It involved using machine learning to customize the interface for each user. I was impressed by his initiative and innovative thinking. I had studied computer science in college too, and was able to provide some useful debugging tips as we reviewed his code. The morning flew by as we became absorbed in our work. Around noon, Karen, one of the engineering managers, stormed over to us, her face red with anger. "Just what do you think you're doing?" Karen shouted at Mark. "You don't have approval to work on this feature. Do you have any idea how much time and money you are wasting?" Mark stammered. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." Karen cut him off. "This is completely unacceptable. Not only are you incompetent, you can't even follow simple protocols around here." I quickly intervened. "Excuse me, but I was the one who asked Mark to work on this. I think it could really enhance our product." Karen turned her fury on me. "How dare you undermine my authority?" she shouted. "Who do you even think you are?" "I'm Tom from IT, I replied calmly. "I was just trying to help." "Oh, you were just trying to help, were you?" Karen snarled. "It's idiots like you that throw everything into chaos around here. I've had it with rogue employees." Karen then called security on her cell phone. "We have 2 unauthorized men wasting company resources in the engineering department. Come escort them out immediately." I was shocked when 2 uniformed security guards suddenly showed up and grabbed me and Mark by the arms. "Wait, stop," I pleaded as they dragged us towards the exit. "I'm not who you think I am." But the guards ignored me as Karen stood smirking triumphantly. I couldn't believe what was happening. Finally, just as we approached the front doors, I yelled out, "Stop! I'm Tom, the CEO!" The guards instantly froze. Shock registered on their faces as they let go of my arms. Karen's smirk melted away, replaced by a look of horror as the color drained from her face. She realized who I was. "You're the CEO?" she stuttered in disbelief. "Yes, and you are relieved of your duties, effective immediately," I stated firmly. Karen's lip quivered as tears started forming in her eyes. "Please, you can't do this," she begged. "I've worked so hard to get to where I am. Don't take this away from me over one mistake." But I'd seen enough of her abusive management style for one day. "Your behavior has been completely unacceptable," I said. "Now please gather your things and security will escort you out." Karen broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as the guards led her away. Meanwhile, I put my hand on Mark's shoulder. "Come on, let's get some lunch. You've earned it." Mark was speechless and stunned by what had just transpired. As we walked to a cafe around the corner from the office, I explained to him who I really was and why I had decided to shadow him for the day. "You have a ton of potential," I told him. "Don't let what happened with Karen discourage you. She won't be managing anyone from now on." Mark finally cracked a smile. "I can't believe I was working side by side with the CEO all morning. I should have guessed something was up when you knew so much about our code." We both laughed. It felt good to reveal my true identity and establish a mentorship bond with Mark. I wished I had done this sooner. When we returned from lunch, word had spread rapidly about Karen's dismissal. Employees gathered in clusters, speaking in hushed, astonished tones about the dramatic confrontation. For many, it was the first time they learned that I had been the one posing as an IT worker. "Did you hear? The CEO himself dressed up as a techie and busted Karen," I overheard one employee whisper. "About time, too. She's been nasty for years. He sure pulled a fast one to finally get the proof," another replied. It was a bit uncomfortable being the center of gossip, but overall the mood in the office felt lighter, like a toxic cloud had been lifted. Over the next few weeks, our head of HR confirmed that employee morale and retention improved significantly with Karen gone. Her reign of bullying and intimidation was over. I learned some important lessons too. While I valued walking among our workers unrecognized, I realized the potential dangers of being unidentifiable to security teams. And I saw how my presence could empower employees who might normally feel too intimidated to share their innovative ideas openly. Mark and I meet regularly now for mentorship. His machine learning feature was a huge success after we officially rolled it out. He got promoted to senior engineer and helps nurture younger interns just as I tried to mentor him. As for me, I still make it a point to interact directly with employees at all levels, but I'm more upfront about my position these days. Turns out I can promote transparency and an egalitarian culture even as the CEO. I just need to make sure it's clear at the start that I'm the one signing the paychecks. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My significant other, SO, and I were renting a ground floor unit at a really nice apartment complex. I wouldn't say it was a luxury apartment or anything, but our ground floor unit had a little patio off the back that led out into a really nice courtyard area with hammocks, a walking path, outdoor fireplace, a seating area, etc. A lot of people walk their dogs out there or let their kids play out in the grass, including us. We have a 1-year-old cane corso. We got her when we had been living in the unit for about 2.5 months, and she was only 8 weeks old at the time. She's a really good dog, and we trained her well. We could let her out to go potty, and she'd come right back, even if there were distractions /people/dogs out. We always stood on the patio and watched her anyway because our pet agreement said we couldn't leave our dog unattended. Then we'd go pick up her poop right away if she pooped. Also part of the pet agreement, as I'm sure is standard at most apartment complexes. We kept a small step trash can outside specifically for her poop bags because we didn't want to throw them away inside, and the only outside trash cans were on the other side of the building, which I agree is super dumb. It really was a small trash can, like the kind you'd tuck into the bathroom between the toilet and the wall. We also had her poop bags hanging on our patio door handle for easy access, so we didn't have to hunt for them every time we needed them. This lady and her kid moved into the ground floor unit in our building, 2 units down from us. No biggie. We ran into her one day carrying groceries, and my SO held open the door for her. She seemed kind of Karenish, but was polite, and her kid, probably 10, 11 years old, didn't look up from his phone. Whatever, that's pretty typical of kids these days. They also had a dog. A little black and white fluffy thing. Super cute, but not trained very well. I don't know what kind of dog it was, but it was much smaller than our already giant puppy. After about 2 weeks or so, we realized that there were dog turds in the grass right off our patio. We found out the hard way because my boyfriend stepped in it the first time. Luckily, he wasn't barefoot. They were clearly not our dog's turds because 1, we always picked up her poop right after she went, and 2, they were very obviously from a small dog, not our 70-pound puppy. We'd been in the apartment about 8 months at that point and had never had an issue with this, so we figured it was EM's little dog. I wrote her a polite note that basically said, "Hey neighbor, we noticed that some of your dog's poops aren't being picked up and are right off our patio. Per the pet agreement we all have to sign, we all need to be picking up our own dog's poop each time they go. I'm sure it was an accident and you just didn't notice, so if you could make sure to do that going forward, we'd appreciate it. Your neighbors in Unit Hash." She wasn't home, so I slipped it under the door and went back to my apartment. A couple of hours later, this lady is banging on my door and gets really angry with me. She insists that it couldn't have been her dog, and how dare I assume. I felt really bad, and I apologized immediately. I said I didn't mean to offend her, and it must have been someone else. She told me never to bother her with crap like this again, and stormed off. I was like, okay. Not 3 days later, I was sitting on my patio with a book, enjoying the cool weather when I see their little dog run out of their back door, no one with it, and it comes over to me. I said hello to the pup, because I love pups. And then it took a crap right off the patio, ran back home, and scratched the door to be let in. I saw her kid slide the door open enough to let the dog in and then close it again without coming outside to pick up the poop. I was annoyed because I saw it with my own eyes that it was their dog, and no one was even watching it when it was outside. So I grabbed a poop bag, picked up the poop, wrote another less polite note about her kid neglecting to watch the dog, or come to check if it had pooped and pick up after it, and dropped the poop bag and the note on their patio right by the door, then went back to my reading. EM was quicker to come by this time and stomped right up to me, waving the note around. Then she stated that her kid was just a kid and probably just forgot to check. I said I didn't care. Her kid was old enough to stand outside for 3 minutes and come pick up the dog's poop. She said, well, there are no poop bags, trash cans on this side of the building, and she didn't feel comfortable making her kid walk all the way around the building for that. The next part is my own fault in hindsight. I suggested she put a trash can like mine on her patio and leave their own poop bags handy like we do for our dog. She eyed our stuff, huffed some more, rolled her eyes, refused to do anything about the poop, and walked off. At this point, I was super annoyed. I stalked my patio door for the next couple of days as much as I could, just waiting. And sure enough, on day 2 in the evening when I was about to give up, I see the puppy run outside towards my patio. I whipped out my phone, took some pictures of the dog outside alone, not allowed, and the dog pooping, and then took another photo an hour later of the poop still there, time-stamped all of them. Then I sent an email to the apartment office people, who were always pretty nice, and they responded quickly that they would give her a warning about it. And sure enough, this lady comes back again to get mad and yell at me about how petty I was to report them to the office, and now they had a $150 fine for not picking up their dog poop. It's worth noting that these fines were rare. Poo prints were not used at this complex. In order for the office to fine someone for dog poop, they had to have proof that it was that specific tenant's dog's poop, and that it wasn't picked up. Hence the photos I'd taken and time-stamped. I told her that I had tried to be nice about it with her twice before, and it was her own fault at that point for not abiding by the terms of the pet agreement we all had to sign, everyone who had a dog at least. She went off about how she's a single mom and she works during the day, and her precious baby can't be expected to pick up after their dog. I told her that a 10-11-year-old was plenty old enough to pick up after a dog, and if they weren't responsible enough, then maybe the kid shouldn't be letting the dog out at all, and she should be the one to do it. Or maybe whoever is home with him should be looking after it. She got angry, told me I had no idea how to be a single mom, that her mom stays with him during the day and shouldn't be expected to look after her kid and her dog, and she stomped off again. I expected to hear more about it, but I didn't. The ironic part is I am a single mom. My kid isn't my SO's, and I raised him alone for 2.5 years before I met my SO, so yes, I do know how hard it is. And I live 1,000 miles from my closest family, so I never even had the luxury of being able to have my mom watch my kid. Over the next couple of weeks, we didn't find any more dog turds off our patio. But we did notice our poop bags were depleting, and our trash can was filling up way more quickly than usual. I had my suspicions and wanted to test it. We had recently bought some small security cameras for inside our apartment for different reasons, and I had my boyfriend set one up outside on the patio. We faced it where it could see our door and trash can but didn't point to the rest of the courtyard or other people's units. We respect privacy around here. Sure enough, the same evening my boyfriend set it up, I see the kid walk onto our patio, take a poop bag, walk out of frame, and then come back to throw it in our trash can. Okay, now I'm pissed, but also not trying to fight this lady or her kid. So I move the poop bags to the inside door handle. It's a glass door so you can still see them, but we always lock our sliding door. The next morning, I hear someone knocking on the back patio door, and I go to see her kid standing there looking annoyed. I didn't open the door, I just spoke loudly enough to ask what he needed. He demanded a poop bag for his dog's poop. I said, I'm sorry, but these are our poop bags for our dog and they aren't free for anyone else to use. The apartment provides poop bags in a dispenser near the trash can on the other side of the building. The kid started demanding a poop bag, saying his mom told him he could use ours, slapping his hands on the glass a few times, trying to scare me.
Yes, I'm so terrified of a 10-year-old boy. And finally screaming at me that he's telling his mother on me. I said, "Fine, go ahead, I'll tell her the same thing." Sure enough, a few minutes later, his mom is standing on my patio, also demanding a poop bag for her dog's poop. I denied her a bag and asked her to please step off of my patio as she was making me feel unsafe and uncomfortable. My SO wasn't home. She told me I was a bratty child, I'm 24, and she demanded I let her use my poop bags as I had already told her she could before. I said no. I told her to get some herself and do what I do. Keep them close by and put your own trash can on your own patio, not use the bags I buy with my own money for my own dog, and then fill up my tiny trash can with your dog's poop. I pointed out that she could use a plastic shopping bag if she didn't want to buy her own poop bags, or she could use the bags the complex provided on the other side of the building. She kept going off on me, and I finally told her if she didn't leave my patio, I'd call the police as she was harassing me. The apartment office was closed on Sundays, and of course, it was Sunday. She acted like she was going to call my bluff, but then my boyfriend got home and walked up behind me to ask what was going on, and she ended up dragging her kid away, again, leaving the poop in the grass off my patio. So once she was gone, I took another time-stamped picture of the dog poop, downloaded the footage from my security camera of her kid stealing my poop bags and throwing them in my trash can, and the footage from them that morning yelling at me and demanding my bags and my denying them, and emailed all of it to the apartment management. I told them that she made me feel unsafe and uncomfortable in my own home, that she and her child felt entitled to come onto my patio and take my belongings. I also went outside, picked up her dog's poop, looked in the trash can on my patio, and pulled out the bags with her dog's poop. They were significantly smaller than my dog's poops, as I'm sure any dog owners could tell the difference in poops of a 12 lb dog versus a 70 lb dog. I went and opened all the bags and dumped the poop straight on her patio right outside the door. On Monday, I heard back from the office lady who said she would take care of it. By Friday, there was a moving truck and the lady and her kid were moving out. I'm pretty sure they were evicted, or at the very least urged to move before a formal eviction process was initiated. After talking to some of our other, much friendlier neighbors, it turns out we weren't the only ones who had been complaining about her. They'd only lived in the complex for like 2-3 months before they made so many enemies they were kicked out. Sometimes I think I should feel bad for playing a part in them getting evicted, but honestly, I can't bring myself to feel guilty about it. It's not my fault she was a lazy, entitled person who couldn't even be bothered to get a shopping bag to pick up her dog's poop. I never heard from her about the turds I dropped on her patio, but I like to think she stepped in them without looking and knew better than to come idiot to me about it. The next one is an entitled people story. I am a firm believer in live and let live, as long as you are not inconveniencing others for no reason or doing something immoral. There has been a broken down truck on the road next to my house. It is literally blocking an entire lane of the road and facing the wrong direction. It has a trailer attached to it, which makes it an even bigger obstacle to see around. I have finally had enough, and yesterday I called the non-emergency number after I almost hit a kid on a bike who was weaving around the truck and trailer into traffic. About 40 minutes after I called, there was a knock on my front door. A gentleman I had never seen before told me that he owns the truck and trailer that broke down on the road. He said he needs access to electricity to fix his truck and wants to tap into the outside outlet on the side of my patio. I stood there for about 20-30 seconds just staring at him and his audacity. Finally, I replied, "No," and closed the door in his face. Then I let my German shepherds into the backyard who absolutely do not like strangers. I really wanted to look at him and say, "What the hell, dude? Are you offering to pay for the electricity? Of course not, because your issue should not result in me having to pay, in addition to already having been inconvenienced. Not to mention the momentary terror of almost hitting a kid with a car." The next one is an entitled people story. This happened at the food court in my local mall the other day, and it's weird how boundaries and basic social conventions seem not to apply to some people these days. So my wife and I go to the mall and decide, while browsing, that we're going to get some food. We go, my wife says she's not hungry, but I get a burger and fries and then start eating. Halfway through, my wife says she is, in fact, hungry, and she's going to steal some fries. Fair enough, I let her take some fries, and she eats them. A little while later, I've started on the burger, and my wife says she needs the bathroom and walks off, and I have some fries left on the side of my plate. I look down to use my phone as I get a DM from someone, and then I hear a rustling sound at the side of the plate. I look up, thinking my wife has come back and has decided that she wants more, and say, "Hey honey, guess you've made some extra room for more fries." And then spot that no, it's not my wife. There's some random woman, mid-30s, putting her hand in my plate, about to grab the fries. She laughs and says, "Wow, suddenly we're super acquainted, aren't we?" I laugh out of disbelief and say, "Excuse me, why are you trying to steal my food?" She acts offended and says, "Well, you let the other woman sitting by you steal some fries, and you clearly don't want these, so I thought I could have them." I explain that the other woman sitting by me was my wife, but she's just some random person who I don't know and doesn't have any right to my food as I hadn't invited her. She just rolls her eyes, snorts, lets go of my fries, and then walks off. I sit there for a second in disbelief that someone just tried that, and my wife comes back and asks what the woman storming away from my table wanted. I explained what just happened, and we both laughed as it was weird, inappropriate, and something that most people should probably have learned way earlier than someone who seemed to be in her 30s. "I'll just take this stranger's food without asking" is certainly an interesting take on things, but not one I agree with.
The next one is an entitled people story.
I've lived in my house for over 20 years. It's nothing too fancy, just a modest single-family home on a quarter-acre lot out in the suburbs. The neighborhood is pretty quiet for the most part. Sure, there's the occasional spat with a neighbor over a fence or something minor, but nothing too dramatic. At least until Karen moved in next door about 5 years ago. From the first week she arrived, Karen was a nightmare. She complained about every little thing under the sun. Apparently my mailbox was the wrong color, and my garden gnomes clashed with her landscaping tastes. I tried to be polite and brush it off at first. I figured she was just particular and would settle in eventually. Oh, how wrong I was. If anything, Karen's pettiness escalated over the following months. She began calling in noise complaints if I so much as sneezed too loudly after 9 p.m. My poor dog got the blame for excessive barking even when he was silently napping inside. It was getting out of hand. So when my husband Tom and I had the chance to get away on a 2-week Hawaiian vacation last month, we jumped at it. A much-needed break from the suburban drama and Karen's watchful eye. I asked my neighbor across the street, Mark, to keep an eye on the house and take in the mail while we were gone. Karen was sure to be a nightmare if she noticed us away for an extended time. The first few days in Hawaii were absolute bliss. No petty complaints or nosy Nancy keeping tabs on our every move. Tom and I relaxed on the beach and enjoyed fruity cocktails to our heart's content. About midway through the trip, we made the mistake of briefly checking emails. I wish we had just stayed off the grid. There it was, an alarming message from Mark. "Call me immediately about urgent situation at your home. Karen at it again." My heart dropped. This couldn't be good. I called Mark right away, my mind racing with possibilities. "Mark, what's going on? What did Karen do?" I asked nervously. "It's bad, really bad," Mark replied. "Just 2 days after you left, Karen got a bulldozer and demolished your garage. It's completely leveled to the ground. She's claiming that according to some new survey, your garage was partially on her property line. But I looked it up with the county, and the property lines are exactly as they've always been." I was in utter shock. That garage housed all our tools, lawnmower, and Tom's beloved classic car that he had painstakingly restored. The car alone was worth tens of thousands. Mark continued, "I already called the police and filed a report for you. Karen's insisting she has the right to tear down her half of the garage. She's absolutely deranged." I felt sick to my stomach. How could someone be so destructive and entitled? I thanked Mark profusely for handling the police report and immediately started looking into flights home. Our vacation was effectively ruined. Tom and I spent the next few days anxiously waiting to get home and survey the damage. When we pulled up to the house, the destruction was even worse than I imagined. Our peaceful suburban home now looked like a war zone. The garage was completely demolished, with Karen already pouring a new concrete foundation on our land. She definitely took advantage of our absence to commit this atrocity. We immediately got a lawyer involved, and I pressed charges against Karen for the willful destruction of property. Over the following weeks, I learned just how deep Karen's issues went. Apparently, she had pulled similar stunts around town for years. bullying people with frivolous lawsuits and abusing the system to get her way. She thought she could get off scot-free destroying something that didn't belong to her, but not this time. The evidence against Karen was overwhelming. After dragging it through court for nearly a year, Karen was sentenced to 2 years in prison for her crimes. Not only that, but she was ordered to pay over $100,000 in restitution for destroying the garage and damaging Tom's beloved car. As Karen was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she made a dramatic scene as expected. "This is so unfair," she wailed. "I was just taking back what belongs to me. Our survey clearly showed that land was mine." I had to laugh at her delusional lies. Even now, she couldn't admit fault or take responsibility for her behavior. The judge wasn't buying any of it either. With Karen's reputation, the whole town was glad to finally see her get a taste of justice. Over time, we rebuilt the garage and restored some sense of normalcy. The house no longer feels like a crime scene with police tape surrounding it. But I'll never forget coming home from vacation to find our garage mysteriously bulldozed at the hands of our psychotic neighbor. The moral of this story: if you're going on vacation, make sure your home isn't next door to a certified lunatic like Karen. At least I can rest assured that Karen won't be bothering anyone for the next couple years from her new home behind bars. The next one is a pro-revenge story. The cast, note that none of these names are real, they're all pseudonyms to meet guidelines. Brooke, my sister Angie, accounting girl Mark, milquetoast boss Victor, vice president of operations. This story is about my sister's first job after graduating from college with a bachelor's degree in business management back in the mid-70s. She was hired by that recording tape company whose advertising tagline was, "Is it real or is it?" Anyway, her job was the travel coordinator for both the sales and tech support teams out in the field who came to the corporate offices periodically for various types of meetings or training, depending on the field employee's specialty. Brooke's responsibilities included booking airline flights, hotels, rental cars, approving per diems, and other travel-related upfront arrangements. It didn't take her long to figure out that there were a lot of no-shows, particularly from the sales staff, who always seemed to have some valid excuse not to make it to the meeting, and often with last-minute cancellations. You know, the, "I've just booked this golf game with my most important client this week, so can you reschedule me?" type of reasons. Seeing how these cancellations were costing the company big bucks, Brooke hatched a plan that created class rosters for each class, and would, just like a teacher, make notes as to who showed up and who didn't. After the class was over, she would calculate how much those who didn't show up had cost the company in terms of cancellation fees, missed flights, etc., and present them to Mark. His reaction, typical of a middle manager protecting his little fiefdom, would take her report, tell her, "I'll look into it," throw it into his inbox, and then promptly forget about it. My sister has a tremendous amount of patience, unless you're being stupid, which in this case Mark was. As far as she was concerned. Fast forward a couple of months, the reports are still stacked on top of each other in Mark's inbox, and Brooke's getting real frustrated because these field guys are abusing the time and effort she's putting in while attempting to get them in for their required classes. So one day, Brooke's having lunch in the company cafeteria, along with a gal from corporate accounting. They get to talking, and Angie mentions that she's noticed the travel department's expenses are really high, percentage-wise compared to others, and asks if Brooke has any idea why. Well, that was all it took. My sister unloaded her frustration with all the cancellations with no repercussions, thus sending the travel department's budget off the charts. Not to mention the fact she wasn't getting any support from Mark towards reducing the numbers. Brooke tells Angie she's got an idea to put an end to the waste, but she wants to get approval from somebody higher up the food chain in order to implement her idea, because she doubts Mark's ability to comprehend, let alone implement. Angie tells Brooke that she thinks she knows exactly who Brooke needs to talk to, and within a couple of days, Brooke and Angie are sitting in a plush corner office talking to the vice president of operations, Victor, explaining the situation. It only took Victor a couple of minutes to make a decision, after Brooke described what was going on, plus her idea on how to correct it, and he told Angie that Brooke's idea was brilliant, and that the policy change would become effective on the 1st of the month, 10 days later, which he followed up with a memorandum sent to all employees shortly after their meeting was over. Paydays were the 5th and the 20th. Those in the field who had expense accounts had to complete and turn them into accounting by the 5th to be processed and paid along with regular wages, bonuses, and commissions on the 20th. Brooks' policy change idea, with Victor's blessing, was to charge back against the offender's expense account the costs associated with getting him to his corporate meeting when he didn't show up: airline fares, hotel rooms, rental cars, etc. Sis told me that the first month the policy went into effect, the howls of protest could be heard all over Silicon Valley, as several ended up with minuscule paychecks after the chargebacks. But the policy had exactly the results Brooke wanted. Within 3 months, everyone showed up to their meetings on time as scheduled, and virtually without any more no-shows. The next one is a petty revenge story. I think this is the most petty I have ever been, and no need to ask if I was the a-hole because I totally was. But it tickled me and a few others. This happened a few weeks back and still makes my friends, who I have made, laugh about it. I do deliveries around our town, and as such, I need gas to do so. There is one gas station I hit up every morning before work because the gas is cheapest. It is on my route to work and has a better selection of breakfast snacks and drinks than the others around it. Since I have been stopping off there a minimum of 3 times a week for the last 6 years, I have gotten to know the owner and a few of the longtime staff there. They are all good people and treat me nicer than normal employees do. So I try to treat them with as much respect as I possibly can. One morning while I'm filling up, one of the female employees, we'll call her Rachel for this story, was standing idly by one of the pumps. She has a few mental problems, but is one of the nicest people I know. So while my gas is being filled, I strike up a conversation. She tells me she ain't doing so well because she is supposed to take out the trash from the outside bins and put it in the dumpster around the side of the building. The way the building is designed, there is only one way to get to the dumpster to put anything in it, and that way is clearly marked with signs and paint saying, "Do not park here," or "Block the dumpster." I look over and there is a caravan of about 5 minivans parked around the area. Most were in legitimate parking spaces, but the biggest one with a massive roof rack was parked awkwardly in front of the dumpster, completely blocking it off. I asked Rachel if she had asked them to move, and she said they would move when they were done, and that was over 30 minutes ago. I feel for Rachel and her sad face at that time, so I tell her I will make it up to her. After getting the nozzle put back up and getting my car ready, I drove over to where the van was parked and parked my car in the first open parking spot behind it, effectively completely blocking it in. I get out of my car and walk about 5 steps away when a screeching Karen pokes her head out of the front window of the van. "Hey, can you move your car? I'm parked here." Me: "Oh, but that's not a parking spot." Her: "Well, yeah, that's why I'm trying to get out of it." Me: "Okay, but hold on, I'll just be a minute." I proceed to walk inside the store to get my morning meal as I hear Karen screaming for me to come back. As the door shut in the store, I notice the place is overrun with families buying travel snacks. They are all milling about, but a few are looking out the window saying, "I wonder what Karen is yelling about." They are clearly all in her caravan. By the time I grab my food and drink and make it to the checkout line, she has stormed her way in and is trying to tell me to move my car now. I tell her, "I can't leave, that would be stealing. So I am going to buy my stuff and leave." She huffs at this and notices everyone in front of her is a member of her traveling party, so she just glares at me the whole time. I finally make it to the front after like 10 minutes and go, "Oh wait, shoot, this isn't what I wanted. I'll go put it back and grab what I really want." Luckily, I was still very early for getting to work, so I was milking it for all it was worth. Karen is fuming. When I make it back to the line, someone else is getting in line in front of me, and Karen is trying to tell him to move so I can go first. The owner, we'll call her Jess, tells her she isn't allowed to talk to customers that way, and one more outburst from her, and she will kick her out of the store. Karen mutters to herself, but is silent. I go up to check out, moving and talking as slowly as I can, and ask for a lottery ticket as well. After paying, since no one is behind me, I scratch it off, and what do you know, I won a free ticket, so I buy another one and proceed to scratch it off. Karen, up to that point, had been mildly tolerable, but then she lets out this unholy screech and tells me to stop wasting her time, to which Jess tells her to leave. Karen starts to refuse, and Jess picks up her phone, threatening to call the cops. Karen swiftly leaves at this point, now yelling at her caravan as to why they have to wait. I thank Jess for all that she has done so far and explain what was going on, still really slowly. She laughs and tells me how much she hates people who park there. They get all defensive when you tell them that they can't park there, but this is the first time anyone got their comeuppance over it. I left and saw Rachel standing near my vehicle, doing her best not to laugh. I load up my car and ask if everything is better, and she nods enthusiastically. I move my car to the other side of the lot and watch them all leave one by one, but not before Karen pulled out in front of someone and almost wrecked. The next one is a malicious compliance story. At my last job, my main duty was the IT manager for the entire location, among other duties. I had been there for 3.5 years at that point, and as I was trusted by everyone, if I had something important to say, people listened. During COVID, while other departments' budgets were getting slashed and employees were getting laid off, I was able to replace a lot of our aging IT infrastructure. At the beginning of my last year there, the owner hired a young, I only tell the truth, even though you won't like it, narcissist as his second in charge. He hired this bonehead as his successor to run this location, while the owner would focus on opening up a second. In the first 3 months, Bonehead pissed off everyone, to the point where 15 people from various positions left the company to find another job. This was during the pandemic, where a lot of people were thankful they had a job, and 15 people were like, I'm going to risk finding another job in the middle of a pandemic rather than stay here. He was that bad. As Bonehead started to piss off our customer base and our sales started to suffer, we switched over to cost-cutting mode. The owner had largely checked out at this point, so longtime vendors were replaced with friends and family of Bonehead. Services were downgraded or cut. Pay plans for the sales department were messed with, which further eroded the morale of the workforce. One day, Bonehead comes to me and tells me to stop doing safety checks and maintenance repairs on our products so sales could post larger sales grosses. I loudly objected and went to the owner. As the owner is always happy to hear something about making more money, he threw his support behind Bonehead's idea. A few months of this goes by, and after he fired one of my employees on my birthday because he refused to give Bonehead access to the server room, it was restricted to me, the owner, and my employee. I knew it was time to go. I find a new job, put in my 2 weeks' notice, and of course, Bonehead stops my direct deposit on payday, the day after I put in my 2 weeks' notice. I decide it isn't worth working the extra 2 weeks and inform them that I am out of there while filing with the state over my wages being withheld. As I'm walking out the door, Bonehead reminds me that I'm no longer an employee of the company and not to get involved with the company's affairs and possible legal repercussions if I say anything negative about the company. My new job pays more, fewer hours, less stress. Fast forward to this Monday, I get a call from my local internet provider. They tell me my internet service bill has gone unpaid for the last 6 months and will be cut off if I don't pay immediately. I log in and see that my account is paid. So after a few back and forth exchanges, I find out that I am still the point of contact for my former job's account on their internet service. Remembering what was told to me when I left, I just inform them that I cannot get involved as I no longer work there. They ask me for an updated point of contact. If they cannot get one, they will be forced to suspend their service. I repeat that I am not allowed by threat of legal action to be involved in their affairs and leave it at that. An hour later, a buddy I know who still works there calls me and tells me they had to stop working as their internet service was shut off. I play stupid, but it takes 3 days to restore it. The next one is an entitled people story. My wife has a friend we'll call Beth, who is a single mom but receives a lot of help from her parents. They often watch her kid, allowed them to move in rent-free while she was getting settled after relocating, things of that nature. She's pretty ungrateful about all the help she gets. I've heard her complaining about her parents over things like them asking her to get milk on her way home from work and having to take care of her mom while she was sick with COVID. She also expects her parents to watch her kid without giving any notice. Beth also has a really negative opinion about all men, stemming from her terrible choices in partners, and is antagonistic and vocal about it. She loves to pick fights with the dads in the friend group about how men don't contribute domestically, and they're all oppressive scum. The dads in the friend group are very involved with their children, and are good domestic partners who put in their fair share. I am my daughter's primary caretaker and do the vast majority of the domestic responsibilities around our home. My wife is the breadwinner. My wife is very happy with my parenting and our division of labor in our home. I also make sure my wife gets leisure time free of our daughter whenever she wants it. This has done little to dissuade Beth from making disparaging comments. We all recently went to an event at a park. This event wasn't really my thing, but I went along to keep our daughter occupied. This way my wife could relax and enjoy catching up with her friends without having to chase around our high-energy preschooler. Beth commented that it's nice my wife has a babysitter, as if me spending time with my daughter is babysitting and not parenting. Beth and my wife have plans coming up to go to a crafting workshop. While discussing their plans for the day, Beth asked my wife if I'd babysit her kids since I'd be staying home with my daughter. She did not offer to pay, so my wife shot her down. Beth said she probably has to cancel if I won't watch her kid. My wife said that's too bad and she'll go alone. Beth has had several months to arrange childcare for their plans, but likely told her parents yesterday and found out they couldn't. Having enough money to hire a babysitter isn't the issue either. Beth is successful in her field and very comfortable financially. If Beth had ever offered to watch our daughter or wasn't completely toxic towards me because I have a penis, I'd have no problem helping her out. Her entitled attitude about me babysitting for free is what gets me the most. I'd never ask someone to babysit my kid without offering to pay. Edit for info. I wanted to give more info to address the repeated questions. My wife is still friends with Beth because she is the most reliably there for her friend. Beth nearly always makes time and space for my wife when she's in need of someone outside of us. Additionally, they've been friends since they were children. Beth wasn't always this toxic, but has always been someone to stir the pot. Beth and I aren't friends. I very occasionally put up with her for my wife's sake. I ignore Beth and internally roll my eyes at her bombastic statements. I learned early on not to engage with her rhetoric. She's just trying to bait me into arguing with her. My wife does shut Beth down or correct her when she's being toxic. My wife and I agree that the misandrous comments won't fly around our daughter. I usually give Beth very little thought. I was just so stunned by the audacity of her entitlement that I had to post it. The next one is an entitled parent story. Yesterday, I, 37F, arrived in the US and hurried to the airport restroom. I suffer from radiation colitis due to cancer treatment, making me susceptible to diarrhea and incontinence. While disembarking, I had a minor accident but tried to hold it until I reached the bathroom. This wasn't the first time it happened, so I always carry spare clothes and wipes when I travel. To my dismay, I noticed a long line at the women's restroom. However, the family care bathroom was unoccupied with nobody waiting to use it. Thinking nothing of it, I entered. I heard some screaming behind me, but with the busy airport environment, I ignored it. As I closed the door, a woman carrying a baby physically inserted herself between the door, causing it to open. The following interaction took place. Angry EM. "Excuse me, this is a family restroom. It's not meant for you." Me, struggling to hold it in. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait." EM. "We need to use this bathroom." Me. "It's not your concern, but I have a disability." EM. "What disability?" She persisted in preventing me from closing the door with her body and hands, all while holding her baby. She kept screaming, "What disability?" Despite her grip, I managed to overpower her, pushing her back with the door, and finally closed and locked it. To hell with her and her baby. Family restrooms, which in my opinion should have a different name altogether, are not exclusively for her, and she has no right to harass a cancer patient simply because she chose to have children. I genuinely hope she and her baby experience a situation similar to what I just went through.
The next one is an entitled people story.
My name is John Matthews, and my family has owned a 500-acre farm just outside of town for over a century now. It's been passed down from generation to generation ever since my great-grandfather first settled on this land. Through the ups and downs, we've managed to keep the old homestead going as a working farm. That all changed the day my sister-in-law Karen married into the family 5 years back. Even as a young girl, Karen always had a selfish streak. She was used to getting her way and threw tantrums if she didn't. My brother Adam truly loved her, though, despite her fits of entitlement. So when they got hitched, we welcomed her into our family with open arms. Little did I know the havoc she would soon wreak. At first, Karen just made casual comments about how we ran the farm. Mind you, she'd never worked a day out in the fields in her life, yet she acted like she knew better than me or my father who'd managed the land for decades. We smiled and nodded, not paying her much mind. But before long, she got more vocal with her so-called advice. John, you should really rotate those crops more often, she'd lecture. And your irrigation system totally inefficient. My wife Anne did her best to politely defer, explaining that we'd used these methods for years with great success. But Karen wouldn't have it. The last straw was the day she barged into the barn, wrinkling her nose at the smell. This is no way to keep animals. It's filthy. Here, give me the number for your construction contractor. I'll have him modernize this place immediately. That was it. I finally told Karen that unless she wanted to get her own hands dirty, she ought to keep her mouth shut about farm matters that didn't concern her. Well, she sure showed me. I awoke one morning to the loud rumbling of heavy machinery outside. Peering out the window, I saw bulldozers plowing up soil and dump trucks unloading building materials in our south field down by the creek. And there was Karen in her shiny new hard hat, waving her arms and directing the crew. I stormed down there fuming with rage. Anne raced behind, begging me to keep calm, but there was no chance of that happening. "Karen, what in blazes do you think you're doing?" I shouted. She smirked and leisurely sauntered over. "Why, I'm building a gas station, of course. This parcel will be perfect once we clear those trees." My eyes nearly popped out of my skull. "A gas station? On my family's farm? You can't do that." With a cool glare, she shoved a paper in my hands. "Actually, I can. See, this contract here states I legally purchased this section of land from you last month." I looked over the document and could immediately tell it was a fake. My signature was forged sloppily, and half the details were inaccurate. "This isn't legal, Karen. You forged my name. I never agreed to sell." She feigned offense. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing? This is signed fair and square. Maybe you just forgot." She tried to snatch the paper away, but I held tight. "Anne, call the sheriff," I bellowed. By now, a crowd of workmen had gathered, gawking uncertainly. Within 15 minutes, Sheriff Palmer arrived and I showed him the bogus contract. He confirmed my signature was forged and the sale terms were bunk. 2 deputies marched over to Karen and cuffed her hands behind her back. "This is outrageous! I'll have your badge for this!" she screamed. "My lawyers will take you for every dime, John. You'll regret this." I simply waved as the squad car pulled away, a shark grin on my face. Anne squeezed my shoulder, equally relieved to have Karen gone. Over the next few months, I worked closely with my attorney to build an ironclad case against her. We sued for damages, trespassing, construction violations, and forgery. Karen tried every trick, stalling and countersuing, but the judge saw right through it. In the end, I won a hefty financial reward, and Karen got sentenced to 3 years in prison for her deceitful crimes. My fields now have returned to their pastoral splendor. Anne and I stroll through the tall grass and breathe easy, enjoying our walks even more without the specter of Karen looming. Our farm is back under the family's full control, safe from the clutches of that delusional, entitled menace. As I gaze out across the rolling acres, I know my ancestors would be proud that justice has been served. With Karen behind bars now, the future looks bright and peaceful once again. The next one is a pro-revenge story. About 8 or 9 years ago, I worked retail in a small outdoor goods store. 6 members of staff small. Ski stuff in the winter, camping, hiking in the summer. I wasn't passionate about it, but a job's a job. The woman who hired me left pretty soon after I started. She got a job that was in the field of her degree, and she left the store in the care of the supervisor at the time, Lauren. Lauren was the kind of girl we have all had the poor fortune to deal with at some point. Irresponsible, held power over you when it suited her, and tried painfully hard to be your best friend the next. Annoying at best as a supervisor, but abusive with her power as a manager. She started by changing people's shifts so she was never in the store during peak hours. She'd take the easy shifts when the store was dead, and would spend her time hanging out in the back office doing important paperwork, Reed sitting on her phone or reading a magazine. Then she'd start hiring her friends as and when they wanted to work. The staff ended up turning into a conveyor belt of Hot Topic wannabe models. A few of them were okay, but I remember one of them working a night shift, covering a close for Lauren, and closing early, emptying the till, and never being seen again. Lauren later said she'd only known him a week before hiring him. The worst thing she did, though, was abuse the 3-month probation rule. Off the top of my head, they went through 8 different members of staff over the course of 5 months. That might not sound a lot, but in a store of 6 employees, it wasn't a small amount. A member of staff would be hired and would be doing great, and then all of a sudden, "I'm sorry, we don't need your services anymore." And they were gone. "It's just not working out." Vanished. "I just don't think you're the right fit for this role." Disappeared. No notice period. Nothing. Just gone. I found out during one of her please like me spells that the area manager hadn't actually promoted her to be a full manager yet. He wanted to make sure she was the best option for the role. She basically thought that as long as no one else lasted long enough to shine better than her, she'd get the manager role and all perks that come with it. We then hired a woman called Kirsty, who was in her mid-late 30s and was a great person. Enthusiastic, a team player, great with customers. I mean, pretty much exactly what you want in a manager. However, when it was just me and Lauren would go off on how she doesn't like Kirsty, how she was thinking about getting rid of her unless her attitude improved, etc. And I decided to step in. I got my phone and hit record as Lauren went on another rant later on. "Here's the thing Kirsty doesn't get. I'm in charge. I can fire whoever I want. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if I was taking over from that fat bell end of an area manager we have now in a year," etc., etc. I just let her talk, only responding with "Really? Oh yeah?" That night, I sent the video to Kirsty, telling her to make sure she was on her best behavior, but she ended up taking the issue up with the area manager. He came to the store, called Lauren out, told her that in the time she'd been in charge, the store had lost somewhere in the region of $15,000, $20,000. They had to get the police involved against her friend who stole from the tills, and our store, for some reason, had one of the highest turnover rates in the country. He fired her on the spot, Kirsty ended up taking over as manager, and the store finally started turning a profit. The next one is a petty revenge story. I knew exactly who it was. She was the only one who had seen where I put them. This woman was a pain, opinionated, gossipy, lazy, and just all-around drama. I'll call her Karen. I knew if I approached her, she'd deny it, get all butthurt, and make a scene, so I let it go. One morning I took a personal call and was away from my desk for about 30 minutes. When I returned, a new package of cookies I had brought that morning had been opened and was 4 cookies short. She must have watched me leave and come by while I was outside. Until now, she had just taken a few out of what was already open, but she'd graduated to opening boxes. The audacity! I took a sheet of white paper and wrote in big black Sharpie letters, "Karen, stop stealing from me, you fat, entitled person. I've got you on video. Don't make me take it to HR or put it on the internet. Shame on you." I taped it over the food so she would see it as soon as she slid the door open. Once she saw the note, Karen would have 2 choices. 1, admit she was caught. 2, pretend she hadn't seen it. The problem was that Karen did not like being called out, and I knew it would kill her to stay quiet and pretend like she didn't see me calling her a fat person. The next morning, I walked by Karen's desk like normal and said hello. She refused to look at me. Me, "Good morning, Karen." Karen, grunts hi. I stopped in front of her desk and made a face of fake concern. "Everything okay?" Karen turned her chair toward me, and I knew she had seen the note. I could see it in her eyes. She loathed me for calling her out, and she knew that unless she admitted to it, she couldn't say a damn word about it. I smiled broadly. "Karen, I'm great. Insert sarcasm here. Thanks for asking." I got to my desk and opened the drawer. The note was still there, but my food had not been touched. She hated me after that and would badmouth me to anyone willing to listen. The thing was, she could never quite explain or give details as to why I was such an idiot, as she claimed I was. I didn't care. My snacks were safe. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened a couple of years ago in December 2019. I got a job at a higher-end grocery store in the area as I was planning on saving for when I started college in the fall of 2020. The store has all kinds of different departments, like a market cafe, pizza sub shop, cheese, etc. I aced my interview and was hired in the bakery department specifically for breads only. That'll be important later. The first 4 months were a breeze, but after COVID-19 ramped up, my doctor put me on leave until August. When I returned, a lot of people had quit in the bakery. I was taking college classes now, so I was working night shift part-time from 9 p.m. My department manager, Hannah, informed me that they were short-staffed on nights, and I might be on my own 1 day a week. I was sure I would be getting help for the rest of the nights. Nope. Weeks went by and I barely got help. I was burning myself out doing the closing shift on my own along with my schoolwork. No one was in the dessert or breakfast section, and I couldn't talk to anyone about it because they were gone by the time I clocked in. I complained to the bread manager, Jim, and he told me to talk to Hannah since she runs the whole department. Sure, fine. This is how the conversation went with Hannah. OP, hey, I wanted to talk to you about the workload. A lot of day shift people leave their mess and can't clean up after themselves. I have to do that and my duties, which isn't fair. Are you hiring anybody for nights? I can't keep running around and using my inhaler so much, too. Hannah. Oh yeah, we're having a hard time filling the night shift roles. We could always train you for desserts and breakfast. OP. That's not what I meant. I meant assistance, not more responsibility. I can't do everything in the bakery and close with only 4 hours. Hannah. Well, you can figure something out. Just make sure you don't leave a mess during closing, though. You can't leave until everything is done. I can't leave until everything is done? Okay. Ever since she said that, I started documenting every time I had to do 3 jobs at once. I would take my sweet time when I didn't have class the next day, making sure I clocked out at 11 p.m. each time. The amount of stuff that kept piling was ridiculous, but I was simply following her instructions. HR noticed my clock in and out times and wanted me to come by their office. I told them everything, including what Hannah said to me, along with the photos I took. Suddenly, everything changed. At 9 o'clock sharp, they were kicking me out, and whatever was left was for the morning. Ha! Hannah was reprimanded but wasn't fired until she was caught selling 2-year-old expired pumpkin pies to customers during Thanksgiving. That day sure was a doozy. I was shocked when I saw all those empty boxes she already sold. The next one is an entitled parent story. So before 2018, my father-in-law met this weird girl who was one of those whack jobs who thought that she owed the universe and shouldn't have to apologize for her behavior. When first meeting her, she would do this strange thing, claiming she was socially inept and couldn't handle talking to strangers. She even went as far in the following years as to throw herself in harm's way, to avoid talking to people, and would claim they were in the wrong for being there, unannounced or uninvited. Both of these were lies every time. Despite not caring for her strange antics, my husband John, not his real name, would often let the abnormal behaviors go and tell his father that since he seemed genuinely happy for the first time since his mother passed away, he was cool with whatever decision he made, not to mention that father-in-law was a grown man who didn't need his son's permission and was only looking for his input. Father-in-law is very caring and Mormon, so he is very religious. We didn't find out until much later that she forced her way into his life to marry into the family because she was crazy. Fast forward to 2018. My husband and I are getting married. Aside from a few things that irked us, the hole she was digging for herself kept growing, constantly ridiculing us for something she disagreed with. Monster would on more than one occasion try to erase my mother-in-law by telling my father-in-law she would destroy or get rid of all his electronics, forcing my father-in-law to clean up after a dog he never wanted, nor had the time to take care of, working 12-plus-hour shifts. At the same time, she remained jobless. The list was growing, and the enormous pile of crap was how manipulative she had gotten. Father-in-law was constantly asking Monster if he could visit his mother. You heard me right. He was 20 years her senior at least. And she had a problem with him seeing his sister and mother literally across the street because they will convince you to divorce me. The straw that broke the camel's back was my eldest daughter. During the wedding, Monster faked illnesses and lied to everyone attending that she was paying for and doing everything for the wedding and that she should have the most pity because of everything she was going through. FYI, my mother was the one who shelled out nearly $30,000 for our wedding, and that was comparatively small. We tried hard to work with Monster on the one event she offered to host to make it relatively cheap on her and father-in-law because she was unable to make a lot of money. We learned that because of her constantly getting in debt with loan sharks for scams she used to pull. We aren't money hungry, and I was happier just enjoying a nice BBQ with the family rather than going to a restaurant. She worked out. During this time, she continually disregarded what we wanted for our wedding. She practically tried to force us to have a wedding in Vegas and get hitched, something I told her and my family I was not comfortable with because of personal issues I was dealing with at the time. Then she had the gall to try and guilt trip us into spending our baby-making honeymoon in Florida with her family. Something that we were extremely uncomfortable with, considering we had never met them before. And from what she had said to us prior, they wouldn't like us because of our political views anyway. I had to tell her no, not exaggerating, 17 times, that we already paid for a spot for our honeymoon, where we could enjoy ourselves alone. She offered her medicinal weed to minors at the party, rolled down a hill of grass in the wedding dress my father-in-law paid for, and then crawled around on the ground during the reception to throw cake at a child. We still, for some ungodly reason, tried to reason with Monster for the sake of my father-in-law. But John had had enough of her. Come time after the honeymoon, we find out that I am pregnant. We tell everyone is happy, and then more drama ensues. Monster kept trying to push her views on other people, saying that we were wrong to have a gender reveal party and call our baby anything because the baby hasn't decided what gender it wants to be yet. We decided to name our daughter after my mother-in-law because it was my husband's wish, and I was more than happy to comply because my mother-in-law, to this day, is a saint, and we miss her terribly. R.I.P. Mama. So we decided to have a baby shower that aligned perfectly with mother-in-law's birthday. It was our way of celebrating old life with new life. I wanted there to be boys and girls allowed to showcase how much her family loved her. However, Monster and father-in-law planned to be out of town, never wound up going, and asked if we could do a small get-together instead. I agreed to keep the peace, but she instead went behind my back, planned out an entirely second baby shower, did not invite a single person from my side of the family, and refused to have any boys there. She even went as far as to idiot at me because my mother refused to come, and there were a few boys that I invited that she was uncomfortable with coming. Things got worse when closer to delivery. She was offended that I did not want her in the delivery room because I had preeclampsia, and she was used to making my blood boil and spike high with her antics. I politely told her the only ones allowed in the room were my husband and mother, and she claimed she would impersonate a doctor and sneak into my room. Thankfully, that was shut down quickly, as if I wasn't already dealing with a ton. Next, she caused drama in the waiting room the entire time I was in labor, claiming, "Why did we even come if it was going to take so long? I have better things I could be doing." Then after the fact, she made a disgusting comment that made John angry. I don't know how it happened, but some of my DNA got into this baby somehow. She was not blood related to any of us, and it upset my husband that, like with many other things, she kept making everything about her and not about our baby. Needless to say, after all the hell Monster had put us through, her constantly lying about her medical history made us wary of her actions. Their house was always covered in dog poop and piss because she refused to clean it. I will vomit at the smell of it, and said she was prone to fainting spells and could die any day without warning. John and I were not okay with this woman ever being left alone at home with our baby. She even commented about giving my baby things to keep her calm on more than one occasion, and how she felt uncomfortable letting any boys near my baby because I don't know what triggers boys to become pedophiles, including John and father-in-law. Yeah, a real piece of work. So finally, after one too many incidents, we tell her off and inform Monster and father-in-law of the ground rules we have set. She flips out and calls us the a-holes for keeping her grandbaby away from her, even though she was the one who cut contact. My exact words to her were, "If you still want to make contact with your grandbaby, we don't mind meeting in an open public space of your choosing where she won't be affected by whatever is giving her hives in your house." And her reply was, "No, I can't bond with something being dangled above my head like a carrot on a stick." John saw red. He wanted to cut Monster and father-in-law out of our lives for good. I managed to calm him down enough to try and keep father-in-law in the loop, considering she was very clearly manipulating him to this point. There is so much to it, but basically, after many threats to our lives, where she said, "You have no idea what I am capable of. I will do whatever it takes to get my way," and at one point, threatening to hurt my husband if he didn't comply with her views, we blocked her on all forms of media. Her response was to use her secondary account to message him and say, "Blocking me? Oh, so mature." And we blocked her again. We even threatened legal action because she constantly texted us through father-in-law's phone. It was easy to know who was talking based on vocabulary. And in the end, it was hilarious when she and father-in-law tried to press the grandparents' rights on us. All I had to say to that was, "Let's see what the courts think about your wife illegally growing marijuana in the basement, leaving disgusting dog feces all over the house for 12 plus hours until you get home, an aggressive dog that will eat the back of your skull, her constant abusive and neglectful behavior, and her constant medical problems, which include fainting and death at a moment's notice, and see if she is still capable of suing for grandparents' rights in that home. Newsflash, she doesn't have a case. We are a loving family that has tried everything to include and deal with her childish and obnoxious behavior. But she has shut us out. Now we are done. Since around 2020 to 2021, we have been rid of her, and officially she's gone. So party. And to anyone with a similar problem with these monsters, do not be afraid to say no. Record their neglectful behavior and seek professional help against them. You are not wrong for wanting to protect yourself. Love you guys, and I hope you have a great time reading. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.